I'll have to apologize. I didn't know we could bring music videos next time, I promise. First of all, I want to thank everybody who made today possible and made this great organization and had the courtesy to invite me. The general premise is that I will be talking to you about the Turkish contemporary art market. Oh, thank you. Sorry. I'm not good with these yet. Yet a cold, dry presentation of facts and general numbers are not what you will hear today. Instead, I want to give you some relevant background to a view of contemporary art markets and how this sets the stage for one of the most exciting scenes that I have the pleasure and the honor of working in. In order to talk about a finger, I am compelled to talk about the hand it is a part of, and of course mention the body that it's attached to. If the contemporary art scene or market is the hand, then we can say that the Western dominant scene since near the turn of the 20th century was the opposable thumb. Art, in this case, was used, monetized, commercialized, popularized, and mass consumed on a scale never before imagined. Even without knowing anything specific about this particular Turkish appendage, anyone who's even passing acquainted with the body, or in other words, the general landscape of the contemporary art market, would say, ah yes, Turkey, that's an emerging market, right? But what do we mean by emerging? Zach Miner of Phillips de Paris suggests that emerging is an effective but ultimately limiting term used to describe a wide cross-section of artists employing an even broader array of practices. Most commonly, it qualifies an artist often at the beginning of his or her career, implying the promise of a building consensus as to the importance and value of the work. This complex dynamic can be driven and impacted by critical response and curatorial support, as well as market success and reputation. While giving a good introduction to the theme of emerging, the statement really more or less defines an individual rather than a collective or a localized scene. To delve further into these definitions in the hope of getting an answer, we can look at the following statement from Terry Smith, who's a professor of contemporary art history and theory at the University of Pittsburgh. And he describes emergence in the following statement. The term emerging artist is an artifact of the relatively recent professionalization of visual arts production, the boom in the market for contemporary art, and the Malthusian output of graduates from the expansion of tertiary education in many countries since the 1960s. It highlights the first step in the career of an individual artist, rather than the participant in a collective or a movement, or a member of a generation. These terms are echoes from modernity. Emergence is a contemporary term. It highlights incipience, the fantasy of perpetual coming into being. This can include artists often mature, highly accomplished artists from outside the great art distribution centers who come to its notice. The term presumes a career path that could lead on to mid-career, senior, and lifetime achievement levels. 3 years seems to be about the average time frame for this transitory state. After that, one has emerged and thus stays in limbo, drops out, or joins the cohort of the dominant, or at least the prevailing, while one stays until residual decline slowly sets in, or one is abruptly sidelined. Meanwhile, emergence continues to emerge. On the matter of an emerging market, Simon de Paris is quoted as saying, Whenever there is an economic boom in a place, it usually goes hand in hand with a creative burst of energy. This is clearly a statement coming from the market side, not necessarily reflecting an artistic process or practice of the process, and mixes commercial market opportunity with creativity. Nor does it help define a market as a whole. Should we really be this simplistic and then hit some sort of metaphoric wall of chicken or egg? The essential truth of the matter is that artists, true artists, will create their works whether there is a market or not. This is something instinctual, like some young individual with an inborn love of running. Whether or not this person is on the Olympic team, it will not stop them from running. Nor will a poet or a writer only produce if they're already under contract with a publishing house. We need to understand that these are only ways to commodify and create context when we start to talk about the body of the market as a whole. The reality of art is that the commerce of it comes from an excess of capital. That relative economic stability is an inherent part in the growth of a market is obvious. If you do not have a stable market, one of the last things that will be invested in is art. Art is a luxury good. It is not an essential commodity like food and shelter. This is a good point at which to pause and look at the larger playing field in front of us. Rather than drown you in pages of facts and figures, let me briefly summarize some of the numbers that make up the global art market. Contemporary and modern art, generally defined as art made since 1875, makes up the largest part of the global art trade at nearly 70%. The European Fine Art Foundation sets the total size of the global art market at 46.1 billion euros, or about $60.8 billion. And that's just for 2011. The 46.1 billion figure includes both public auction data and estimates of art gallery and private art dealer sales. The 46.1 billion is about equally split between auctions and the commercial galleries. It is a fact that the growth of the Turkish art market has gone hand in hand with relative political stability and economic growth. Citing a report prepared by two international arts industry magazines, the French Art Actuel and the Turkish Artist Modern, the Anatolian news agency said the growth in the market was due to a rise in the number of art auctions and galleries during the past 10 years and their influence on buyers. The report said that while total sales in the Turkish art market in 2001 were around $5 million, this figure has grown 20-fold in the past 9 years to reach 105 million. The magazines, citing results from research they conducted, jointly state in their report that Turkey is now among the top 10 countries around the world in contemporary art sales. Now, for me, such numbers are questionable. They usually only reflect auction sales and not directly gallery sales. It's unclear as to whether they cover the sale of heritage works like calligraphy, or etc., as well as modern and contemporary art. They are unclear as to whether this is the sale of only the works of Turkish artists, or if they also cover international artist sales in the Turkish market. In short, does it in any way give you a clear picture of what is really going on? No. I believe it's fair to say that at this time, almost any statistical presumption or declared numbers one will find on the Turkish market are questionable. The one thing that we can all agree on is that there has been significant, unparalleled growth. I would guesstimate that the reality is much larger than these numbers and more in the realm of around $200 to $250 million annually. I would argue that till fairly recently, except for anomalies, what we know of other cultures through the perspective of Western art are the borrowed thematics. the West was, essentially, influenced at times by the other. Yet these were more decorative than substantive human condition issues. In terms of antiques, antiquity, fashion, and decor that made a Western splash, you could refer to a penchant for Egyptology. This relative craze of the 19th or early 20th century, spurred by Western explorers' discovery of those stunning remains. But this doesn't mean that there was a boom in contemporary Egyptian art or the discovery of Egyptian artists. Art from Africa is explored via the telescope of, say, Picasso, yet not that of a genuine African voice. No direct cultural inheritors, no exotic artists from the Belgian Congo, nor the residents of the Dan region were featured, or none of them received laurels in the Western scene. The same could be said for the vast repository that lay in the East. Borrowing from and influence of Asian culture was substantial, but again, not a focus on the individual artist. In short, the other was never really let into the inner circle. After what could be considered a prolonged Western dominance, I would argue that the Asian market came into its own as the actual first other. The catalyst for such phenomenal change can be seen clearly through an economic perspective. Let's recap. Emerging markets are usually characterized by rapid growth and a sudden inclusion into the global economy. This inclusion may have come about due to a regime change or a softening of views towards the rest of the world. Investors around the world usually look to put money to work in emerging markets. The reason? They have the strongest potential for growth. Look at China as a clear example of an emerging market that is soaking up investment capital. Independent studies have found that there are between 23, 26, depending on who you ask, emerging economies throughout the world. These include China, Mexico, Russia, Turkey. Whatever the raison d'etre behind the true birth of the scene, be it relative liberalization of markets, the need to be creative, the need to create an interconnected global arts economic structure, a softening of views, etc., the operation proved very successful. A cultural, monetarily harnessed movement spurred a global trend. The table was set, and there were more people than ever before invited to the banquet. This trend to open new markets to get new diners to the table had one primary new guest after the Asian boom. An oil capital-rich Middle East with near endless financial resources, yet with a considerable vacuum when it came to matters of cultural identity and artistic heritage. One of the spearheads behind this cultural push was the Ford Foundation, which describes itself and its mission as follows. The goal of our work is to empower the marginalized to achieve economic, social, and cultural rights by supporting citizen groups and promoting increased government effectiveness, accountability, and transparency. We believe that the people in the region can overcome social, economic, and cultural marginalization. Of course, the conspiracist theory in me has a small chuckle when looking for motive upon examining the statement that formal ties with either the Ford family or the Ford Motor Company and the Ford Foundation have not existed since the 1970s. You be the judge. A concerted effort to start a big cultural avalanche began rolling in the mid-2000s, shortly after the unveiling of plans of two of the biggest cultural brand names, the Guggenheim and the Louvre Museum in Abu Dhabi. The art scene in a once total desert grew enormously. The International Gulf Art Fair in Dubai now is one of the heavy hitters of the region, complemented by the Sharjah Biennale, much can be said to be developing, as well as a booming commercial gallery scene in Dubai, where there was only 5 art galleries a decade ago. They now have over 100. Sophie Macario, the head of the Department of Islamic Arts at the Louvre, might help to give us some insight as to what part of the agenda is. We must give back the word Islam its full glory and not leave it to the jihadists to tarnish it. She goes on to say, Islamic art is not confined to the art of the Muslim community. It is the art of those who comprise the Islamic world, and in it there were Christians and Jews, she said, referring to the mixed populations in several Islamic empires. While providing some insight into the mind of the Louvre's agenda, the prior statement helps set the stage for what I find to be one of the most exciting, intriguing, and complicated scenes out there. In order to grasp the complexity of the construct, we have to take a bit of a history lesson. The Ottoman Empire, with a legacy that starts in the heart of Asia, was one of the most powerful states in the world. A multilingual, multinational empire that stretched from the southern borders of the Holy Roman Empire to the outskirts of Vienna. Royal Hungary, or modern Slovakia, and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in the north, to Yemen and Eritrea in the south, from Algeria in the west to Azerbaijan in the east, controlling much of southeastern Europe, Western Asia, and North Africa. Covering such a wide expanse of multi-ethnic territory, the Ottoman Empire had a very strong tool in its arsenal, a strong tradition called devshirme, of training the ablest children, irrespective of ethnicity or race, as students. These young individuals were selected for the multicultural population of the empire, the multicultural population of the empire, for leadership positions, either as military leaders or as high administrators to serve the empire. My family is a product of this process. A process that helped to create a mix like never before, one of those unique, truly multi-ethnic cultures of its day. The expansion and presence of such an empire has many levels of influence in leaving behind massive cultural residue, even after the collapse and the contraction of the entity. The modern Turkey that we know now is the core of this once vast empire. The Ottoman dynasty was unprecedented and unequaled in the Islamic world for its size and its duration. I could go on for a lot longer than my allotted time, getting into more and more detail that is directly relevant, but this is an art forum and not a history forum, so I will spare you the details. Let's just fast forward and get to the obvious. Due to many reasons, the empire declined, going through fits of stasis and then rapid explosion. Due to being, in essence, a Muslim empire, there were many handicaps in front of art. Cultural taboos that frowned on the hubris of man to create his own likeness, an abhorrence of sculpture, as it was considered one step from worshiping idols. This was the general landscape into which Western art was transplanted. The modernization of the Ottoman army was one of the breaking points for this indoctrination. Near the 19th century, young military officers were sent off to France to study modern warfare and artillery tactics. Also, as part of their studies, they were taught to draw and paint. This was the point, really, of no return. Ironically, this very delayed emergence